Two police cars pulled onto Maple Street, just as the three fake officers were trying to decide whether to run for their van or attempt to talk their way out of the situation. The sirens stopped, but the flashing lights continued to paint the quiet neighborhood in alternating red and blue colors. Detective Maria Santos got out of the first police car. She was a veteran officer who had been investigating HOA scams in the area for several months. Behind her came Officer Jeff Miller, a young policeman who was eager to learn from the experienced detective. "Mr. Thompson?" Detective Santos called out as she approached Marcus's front yard. "You're the gentleman who called about the fake HOA officers?" "That's correct," Marcus said. He gestured toward the three men who were now standing very close together near their white van. "These are the men who have been threatening my neighbors and demanding money for fake violations." The older fake officer made one last attempt to maintain his scam. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding. We work for the Residential Compliance Enforcement Division, and we were just trying to resolve some property violations." Detective Santos looked at the man with the tired expression of someone who had heard similar lies many times before. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification. Real identification, not fake badges." While Officer Miller kept an eye on the three fake officers, Detective Santos walked over to Marcus. "Mr. Thompson, I understand you have evidence related to this case." Marcus handed the detective a folder that contained everything he had collected over the past 2 weeks. Photos of the fake officers and their van, copies of the fake violation notices they had given to neighbors, a detailed log of their visits and the money they had collected, and even the cigarette butt he had found near Mrs. Chen's house. "This is very thorough," Detective Santos said as she looked through Marcus's evidence package. "You've documented everything like a professional investigator." "I had some experience with investigations during my military service," Marcus said modestly. Detective Santos looked at Marcus with new interest. She was beginning to understand why this particular scam had been stopped when so many others had succeeded. Sarah stepped forward with her camera and recorder. "Detective, I'm Sarah Thompson from the local newspaper. I've been documenting this story and I have video and audio recordings of everything that just happened." "Perfect," Detective Santos said. "We'll need copies of all your recordings for evidence." Meanwhile, Officer Miller had asked the three fake officers to empty their pockets and remove any bags or equipment from their van. What he found confirmed everything that Marcus had suspected. The men had fake identification badges from several different agencies. They had official-looking stationery and violation forms that they had printed on their home computer. They had a metal cash box containing over $3,000 in bills of various denominations. And they had a notebook with names and addresses of elderly residents from multiple neighborhoods. "Gentlemen, you're under arrest for fraud, impersonation of public officials, and intimidation of elderly residents," Detective Santos announced as Officer Miller handcuffed the three men. The older fake officer made one final attempt to avoid responsibility. "This is all a big misunderstanding. We were hired by a management company to do compliance inspections." "What's the name of this management company?" Detective Santos asked. Regional Property Services," the man said. Detective Santos pulled out her phone and made a quick call to the police station. After a brief conversation, she hung up and looked at the fake officer with a knowing smile. "There is no company called Regional Property Services registered in this county or any surrounding county," she said. "There's also no such thing as a Residential Compliance Enforcement Division anywhere in this state." As the three fake officers were loaded into the police cars, neighbors began emerging from their houses to see what was happening. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Rodriguez, the Williams family, and several other residents gathered in Marcus's front yard. "Is it really over?" Mrs. Chen asked hopefully. "Are those men really criminals?" "They're really criminals," Detective Santos confirmed. "And based on the evidence Mr. Thompson collected, we should be able to recover most of the money they stole from all of you." The Williams family started crying with relief. They had been afraid they were going to lose their house over fake violations they could not afford to fix. "Detective," Marcus said, "I believe these men have been running the same scam in other neighborhoods. You might want to check with police departments in surrounding cities." "We're already working on that," Detective Santos said. "Your evidence package is going to help us connect these arrests to similar crimes in at least 5 other jurisdictions." After the police cars left with the 3 fake officers, the neighbors wanted to know how Marcus had figured out that the men were criminals and how he had managed to catch them so effectively. "I just asked them some questions that they couldn't answer," Marcus said simply. "And I had some help from my friends and my granddaughter." Jim, Frank, and Tony were packing up their barbecue equipment and preparing to leave. They had accomplished their mission without having to do anything more dramatic than stand in the right place at the right time. "Marcus," Jim said as he shook hands with his old friend, "it was good to see you in action again. You haven't lost your touch." "I was hoping I'd never need those skills again," Marcus replied, "but I'm glad I still remembered how to use them." Over the next few days, the story of how the fake HOA officers had been caught spread throughout the community and beyond. Sarah wrote a detailed article for the newspaper that was picked up by media outlets in other cities. The story helped police in those cities identify and arrest additional members of the same criminal organization. Detective Santos called Marcus to let him know that the investigation had uncovered evidence of the scam operating in 12 different cities over the past 8 months. The total amount stolen from elderly residents was estimated to be over $50,000. "Mr. Thompson, your evidence package was the key to breaking this case open," the detective told him. "Without your documentation and planning, we never would have been able to catch these people with enough evidence to convict them." Marcus also learned that the 3 men had been arrested before for similar scams in other states. They were career criminals who specialized in targeting elderly people with fake authority schemes. This time, however, they would be facing serious federal charges because they had crossed state lines and used fake government credentials. 2 weeks after the arrests, Marcus received a letter from the prosecutor's office thanking him for his assistance and informing him that all 3 fake officers had pleaded guilty to multiple charges. They would be spending the next several years in prison and would be required to pay restitution to all their victims. Mrs. Chen got her $200 back. Mr. Rodriguez got his $200 back. The Williams family got their $300 back. Every neighbor who had been scammed received full restitution for the money they had been forced to pay. The neighborhood on Maple Street returned to its normal, quiet routine. Marcus went back to watering his garden and taking his evening walks. His neighbors waved at him as they always had, but now they looked at him with a new kind of respect. They had learned that the quiet old man who kept his grass cut perfectly and never caused any trouble was much more capable than he appeared. They had also learned that sometimes the most dangerous person to threaten is someone who looks completely harmless but has spent a lifetime protecting others from people exactly like you. Marcus was content to go back to being the unassuming neighbor who tended his tomatoes and read books on his front porch. But now his neighbors knew that if anyone ever tried to intimidate or take advantage of people on Maple Street, they had someone watching who would not let it happen. The fake HOA officers had thought they were targeting a neighborhood full of easy victims. Instead, they had encountered a retired special operations soldier who still remembered how to plan missions, gather intelligence, and execute operations against people who threatened innocent civilians. Marcus Thompson had traded his military uniform for gardening gloves and his combat boots for comfortable walking shoes. But he had never stopped being the kind of person who stepped forward when others needed protection. The quiet neighbor had reminded everyone that sometimes the most important battles are fought, not in distant countries against foreign enemies, but right at home against criminals who prey on the people we care about most. The older fake officer pulled out his clipboard and looked at it with the same confident expression he had used to intimidate Marcus's neighbors. He had no idea that he was about to face someone who had interrogated terrorists and enemy soldiers. "Mr. Thompson, we've documented multiple violations on your property," the man said in his official-sounding voice. "Your garden gnome is not an approved decoration. Your herb garden contains unauthorized plant varieties, and your window trim is painted the wrong color." Marcus listened to this list with the patient expression of someone who had heard much more creative lies from much more dangerous people. When the fake officer finished speaking, Marcus asked his first question. "Could I see your identification, please?" The fake officer seemed surprised by this request. Most of his victims had been too intimidated to ask questions. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his fake badge. Marcus examined the badge carefully, holding it up to the light and looking at it from different angles. He had seen many real law enforcement badges during his career, and this one was clearly fake. The metal was too thin, The printing was slightly blurry, and the serial number looked like it had been printed on a home computer. "This is interesting," Marcus said calmly. "Could you tell me what HOA enforcement division you work for?" "The Residential Compliance Enforcement Division," the younger fake officer said quickly. "And who do you report to?" Marcus asked. The three fake officers looked at each other. They had not expected these kinds of detailed questions. Most people just listened to their threats and paid their fake fines. "We report to the Regional HOA Management Office," the big man said. "I see," Marcus said. "And what's the name of your supervisor?" "Mr. Johnson," the older fake officer said. "First name?" Marcus asked. "Robert Johnson," the man said after a brief pause. Marcus nodded as if he was writing this information down in his memory. "And what's Mr. Robert Johnson's phone number?" The fake officers were starting to look uncomfortable. They had not prepared for this level of questioning from someone who seemed to know exactly what questions to ask. "We're not authorized to give out that information," the big man said. "But we can have him contact you if necessary." "That won't be necessary," Marcus said. "Could you show me the specific HOA regulations that my property is violating?" The older fake officer pulled out his folder of official-looking papers. "It's all documented in your property file." "I'd like to see the actual regulations," Marcus said. "Not just the violation notices. I want to read the specific rules that say I can't have a garden gnome or herb plants." The fake officers had never been asked to produce actual HOA regulations before. They had always relied on their official appearance and intimidating manner to make people pay, without asking detailed questions. "The regulations are on file at the main office," the younger man said. "Then how do you know? I'm violating them if you don't have them with you?" Marcus asked. This was exactly the kind of logical question that exposed the weakness in their scam. The fake officers were starting to realize that Marcus was not going to be as easy to fool as their other victims. "Sir, we don't have time to explain every detail of HOA regulations," the big man said, stepping closer to Marcus in an attempt to intimidate him. "You have violations and you need to pay the fines. That's how this works." Marcus did not step back or show any sign of being intimidated by the big man's aggressive posture. Instead, he looked directly into the man's eyes with the calm stare of someone who had faced much more dangerous threats than an overweight fake security officer. "Actually, that's not how this works," Marcus said in a voice that was still polite but had gained an edge of authority that the fake officers had never heard before. "Let me tell you how this really works." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed the screen to the three men. "I'm currently recording this conversation. I've also taken photographs of your vehicle, your license plate, and your fake identification badges." The fake officers looked shocked. No one had ever turned the tables on them like this before. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "I called the real HOA office for this neighborhood. They confirmed that they don't have any enforcement officers. They don't issue violation fines, and they've never heard of any of you." The older fake officer tried to maintain his confident attitude. "Sir, there seems to be some confusion about our authority and procedures." "No confusion at all," Marcus said. "You're criminals who are running a scam to steal money from elderly people. You have no authority, no real badges, and no legitimate connection to any homeowner association." The big man decided to try physical intimidation again. He moved even closer to Marcus and raised his voice. "Old man, you need to watch how you talk to us. We're trying to help you avoid serious legal problems." This was the moment that Marcus had been waiting for. The big man had just made a direct threat while being recorded, and he had moved into Marcus's personal space in a way that could be considered assault. Marcus did not raise his voice or step backward. Instead, he spoke in the same calm tone he had been using throughout the conversation. "I need you to step back from me right now," Marcus said. "You're close enough that I can smell the cigarettes on your breath and the cheap cologne you're wearing to try to cover up the fact that you didn't shower this morning." The big man was so surprised by this response that he actually did step back. He had never had someone describe him so accurately and calmly while he was trying to intimidate them. "I can also see that you have a small scar above your left eyebrow, probably from a bar fight when you were younger," Marcus continued. "Your shoes are worn down on the outside edges, which means you walk with your feet turned out, probably because you're carrying more weight than your knees can comfortably handle." The three fake officers stared at Marcus in amazement. How was this quiet old man able to observe and describe such specific details about them? "Most importantly," Marcus said, I can tell from your body language that you've never actually been in a real fight with someone who knew what they were doing. You're used to intimidating people who are afraid of you, but I'm not afraid of you." At that moment, Jim, Frank, and Tony walked around from the backyard, carrying plates of hamburgers and looking like they had just been having a friendly barbecue conversation. "Hey, Marcus," Jim said in a casual voice. "We heard voices out here. Are you having some kind of problem with these guys?" The fake officers looked at the three new men and immediately realized that the situation had changed dramatically. Jim, Frank, and Tony did not look like typical elderly neighbors. They stood with the confident posture of people who were used to handling difficult situations. Their eyes were alert and focused, and they positioned themselves in a way that blocked the fake officers' path back to their van. "No problem at all," Marcus said. "These gentlemen were just explaining to me why I need to pay them money for fake HOA violations. I was explaining to them why that's not going to happen." Sarah appeared in the doorway of Marcus's house with her camera openly visible. "Grandpa, is everything okay out here? I've been recording everything from inside the house." The fake officers finally realized that they had walked into a trap. They were surrounded by people who were documenting their every word and action. They were being questioned by someone who clearly knew how to expose their lies, and they were facing at least 4 people who did not seem intimidated by their fake authority. "This has all been a big misunderstanding," the older fake officer said, backing toward his van. "We'll come back another time when we can clear up the confusion." "No, you won't," Marcus said, still in the same calm voice. "You won't come back to this neighborhood at all, and you're going to return the money you stole from my neighbors." "We don't know what you're talking about," the younger fake officer said. Marcus smiled for the first time during the entire conversation. It was not a friendly smile. "Yes, you do, and so do the real police officers who are on their way here right now." As if on cue, the sound of police sirens could be heard in the distance, getting closer to Maple Street. The 3 fake officers realized that their scam had finally caught up with them. They were trapped in a neighborhood full of evidence and witnesses, facing people who were much better prepared than they had expected. Their easy victims had turned into their worst nightmare. The quiet old man with the perfect garden had just taught them a very expensive lesson about what happened when criminals pick the wrong target in the wrong neighborhood. Tuesday evening, Sarah arrived at Marcus's house with her laptop computer and a digital recorder. She had spent the day researching HOA scams and talking to police officers in other cities who had dealt with similar crimes. "Grandpa, this is bigger than I thought," Sarah said as she set up her equipment at his kitchen table. "I found reports of the same scam in at least 6 other cities. The police think it might be the same group of people traveling around the region." Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from his granddaughter. "What did the police tell you about catching these people?" "That's the problem," Sarah said. "They're hard to catch because they only take cash. They use fake names and they move to different areas before the police can build a case against them. By the time people realize it's a scam and file complaints, the criminals are already gone." Sarah opened her laptop and showed Marcus several news articles about similar crimes. In every case, the fake officers had eventually disappeared after collecting thousands of dollars from each neighborhood they targeted. "But there's something different about what's happening here," Sarah continued. "In the other cities, the scammers stayed friendly and helpful, even while they were stealing money." "What you're describing sounds much more aggressive and threatening." Marcus nodded. "They brought a 3rd man yesterday who was clearly there to intimidate people, and their demands for money are getting bigger. I think they're getting greedier and more desperate." "That could actually work in our favor," Sarah said. "If they're getting careless and aggressive, they're more likely to make mistakes that we can document." Sarah asked Marcus to tell her everything he had observed about the fake officers. She took notes and recorded their conversation as he described their methods, their vehicle, their schedule, and their escalating threats against his neighbors. "Grandpa, I want to write a story about this for the newspaper, but I need more evidence. Do you think you could get pictures of them the next time they come here?" "I already have some pictures," Marcus said. He went to his bedroom and returned with a digital camera. "But I think we can do better than just pictures." Marcus showed Sarah the photographs he had taken of the fake officers, their van, and their license plate. He also showed her the fake violation notices that his neighbors had received. "This is perfect," Sarah said as she looked through the photos. "These pictures clearly show the fake badges and uniforms, and I can have our computer expert analyze these violation notices to prove they're not from a real HOA. Sarah, I have an idea about how we can catch these people in the act, Marcus said. But I need to ask you to do something that might be a little dangerous. Sarah looked at her grandfather with curious eyes. In all her years of knowing him, she had never heard him suggest anything that might put her in harm's way. What kind of dangerous? She asked. Marcus explained his plan. The fake officers would probably return on Thursday to collect more money from the Williams family and check on the fake violations they had cited at other houses. Marcus wanted Sarah to be there with her camera and recorder to document everything they said and did. But I don't want you to be obvious about it, Marcus said. I want you to pretend to be visiting me, but have your equipment ready to record them when they come to my house. Are you going to let them cite you for fake violations? Sarah asked. Marcus smiled in a way that Sarah had never seen before. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who was looking forward to a challenge. I'm going to let them try, Marcus said, but I think they're going to find that I'm not as easy to intimidate as my neighbors have been. Wednesday morning, Marcus got a phone call from his old friend Jim. Marcus, I talked to 2 other guys who want to help with your situation, Jim said. Frank used to be military police and Tony worked in federal law enforcement before he retired. We're all free on Thursday if you want some backup. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said, but I don't want this to turn into anything violent. These are just small-time criminals, not enemy soldiers. Don't worry, Jim said. We know the difference. We just want to be there in case things get out of hand. 3 old guys having a barbecue in your backyard while your granddaughter visits. Nothing threatening about that. Marcus thought about this plan. Having backup was always smart, especially when dealing with people who were becoming more aggressive and unpredictable. And having witnesses who were trained observers would help if the situation ended up in court. All right, Marcus said. Come over around 8:30 Thursday morning. Bring some hamburgers and we'll make it look like a normal social gathering. Thursday morning arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Jim, Frank, and Tony arrived at Marcus's house at 8:15, carrying grocery bags and lawn chairs. To anyone watching, they looked like 3 retired friends getting together for an early barbecue, but Marcus knew better. Jim was 62 years old and had spent 25 years in special forces. Frank was 58 and had been a military police investigator for 15 years. Tony was 65 and had worked for the FBI for 30 years before retiring to private consulting work. These were not just 3 old guys having a barbecue. These were 3 highly trained professionals who knew how to observe, document, and control situations involving criminals. Sarah arrived at 9 o'clock with her camera equipment hidden in what looked like a normal purse. She set up her recorder in Marcus's living room, where it could capture conversations happening anywhere in his front yard. Grandpa, are you sure about this plan? Sarah asked as she tested her equipment. What if those guys get really aggressive when you don't cooperate with them like the other neighbors did? Marcus looked out his kitchen window at Jim, Frank, and Tony, who were setting up a small grill in his backyard. They were talking and laughing, but Marcus could see that all 3 men were positioned where they could quickly move to his front yard if necessary. Don't worry, sweetheart, Marcus said. I have a feeling that these fake officers are about to learn some things about respect and intimidation that they never expected to learn. At 9:25, the white van appeared at the end of Maple Street. Marcus watched it drive slowly toward his house, making stops at the Williams house and Mr. Rodriguez's house first. The same 3 fake officers got out at each house, collected money, and made threats about future consequences. When they finished with the other houses, the van parked in front of Marcus's house. The 3 fake officers got out and walked up his front sidewalk with their clipboards and their confident attitudes. Marcus opened his front door before they could knock. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him, positioning himself on his front porch where Sarah's camera could record everything, and his 3 friends could see and hear from the backyard. Good morning, gentlemen, Marcus said in his usual polite voice. What can I do for you? The older fake officer looked at his clipboard and then at Marcus. Are you the homeowner at this address? I am, Marcus said. Marcus Thompson. Mr. Thompson, I'm Officer Williams from HOA Enforcement. We've been conducting compliance inspections in this neighborhood, and we've identified several violations on your property. Marcus looked at the 3 men with the same calm expression he had worn when facing much more dangerous people in much more dangerous places. I see, Marcus said. And what violations would those be? The fake officers had no idea that they were about to have the most difficult conversation of their criminal careers with someone who had spent 30 years asking much better liars much harder questions than they were prepared to answer. This was the moment that Marcus had been planning for all week. The trap was set, the evidence was being recorded, and the backup was in position. Now it was time to see how well these small-time criminals could handle a real interrogation from someone who actually knew what he was doing. Monday morning arrived with gray clouds and a cold wind that made the fake officers look even more unfriendly than usual. Marcus was waiting at his kitchen window with his coffee when the white van turned onto Maple Street at 9:12. 3 minutes earlier than last week. They were getting eager. This time there were 3 men in the van instead of 2. Marcus watched them get out and gather around the back of their vehicle. The 2 regular fake officers were there, but now they had brought a third man who was bigger and looked meaner than the others. This new man wore the same fake uniform, but he carried himself like someone who was used to intimidating people with more than just official-looking papers. Marcus quickly moved to his living room window, which gave him a better view of Mrs. Chen's house. He had his camera ready and his phone set to record everything that happened. The 3 fake officers walked up to Mrs. Chen's front door and knocked loudly. When she did not answer immediately, the big new man knocked again, harder. Marcus could hear the sound from inside his house. "Mrs. Chen, this is HOA enforcement," the older man called out in a voice that was louder than necessary. "We know you're home. We can see your car in the driveway. You need to open this door right now." Marcus was proud of Mrs. Chen. She was following his advice and not answering the door. But the fake officers were not giving up as easily as they had in other neighborhoods. The big man walked around Mrs. Chen's house, looking in windows and checking her back door. The other 2 men stayed at the front door and continued knocking and calling out to her. "Ma'am, you are in serious violation of multiple HOA regulations," the younger fake officer said. "Your failure to comply is going to result in legal action against your property. We need to speak with you immediately." After about 10 minutes of this, the fake officers gave up on Mrs. Chen and moved to Mr. Rodriguez's house. But Marcus could see that they were frustrated and angry. Their easy intimidation tactics were not working like they expected. Mr. Rodriguez made the mistake of answering his door. As soon as he opened it, the big man stepped forward and put his foot in the doorway, so Mr. Rodriguez could not close the door. "Sir, you are in serious trouble," the big man said in a voice that sounded like a threat. "You have ignored multiple violation notices and failed to pay required fees. Your total debt to the homeowner association is now $650. "I don't have that kind of money," Mr. Rodriguez said. Marcus could hear the fear in his voice from across the street. "Then you need to find it," the older fake officer said. He pulled out his thick folder of fake papers again. "We have documented 17 separate violations on your property. Non-payment of these fines will result in a lien being placed on your house." The big man leaned closer to Mr. Rodriguez. "Do you understand what a lien means, sir? It means you can't sell your house. It means the bank can take your house away from you. It means your family will lose everything." Marcus could see that Mr. Rodriguez was shaking. The fake officers were using fear tactics that went far beyond their previous intimidation methods. They were threatening to destroy this man's life over fake violations that did not exist. "I can pay $50 today," Mr. Rodriguez said quietly. $50? The big man laughed, but it was not a friendly laugh. "Sir, you owe $650. $50 is an insult. What if I pay $100? Mr. Rodriguez offered. The older fake officer pretended to think about this. "We can accept $200 today as a good faith payment, but you need to pay the remaining $450 by Friday, or we start the legal process. And you still need to fix all the violations," the younger man added. "New mailbox, new fence paint, tree trimming, and grass reseeding." Mr. Rodriguez looked defeated. He went back into his house and returned with $200 in cash. Marcus watched the money disappear into the big man's pocket. But the fake officers were not finished with Mr. Rodriguez. They spent another 15 minutes listing all the things he needed to fix around his house. They took more pictures of his property and wrote notes on their clipboards. They made it clear that they would be back on Friday and expected to see major changes. After they finished with Mr. Rodriguez, the fake officers walked to 3 more houses on the street. At each house, they were more aggressive and demanding than Marcus had ever seen them before. They were no longer pretending to be helpful officials who wanted to work with residents. They were acting like bullies who enjoyed frightening people. At the Johnson house, they demanded $400 for accumulated violations and late fees. When Mr. Johnson said he could only pay $100, the big man got very close to him and spoke in a low, threatening voice. "Mr. Johnson, I don't think you understand how serious this situation is. We're trying to help you avoid bigger problems, but if you don't start cooperating with us, this gets turned over to our legal department, and once that happens, we can't protect you anymore." Mr. Johnson paid the $100 and promised to find more money by the end of the week. At the Williams house, the fake officers claimed that the family owed $800 for multiple violations dating back several months. Mrs. Williams started crying when she heard the amount. She said they were on a fixed income and could not afford to pay that much money. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you ignored our violation notices," the big man said, without any sympathy in his voice. The fake officers accepted $300 from the Williams family and gave them until Thursday. To pay the rest, Marcus had seen enough. These criminals were no longer running a simple scam. They were terrorizing his neighbors and threatening to destroy their lives over fake violations. The big man they had brought with them was clearly there to add physical intimidation to their threats. After the fake officers left the neighborhood, Marcus walked around to check on his neighbors. Mrs. Chen was still hiding in her house with the curtains drawn. Mr. Rodriguez was sitting on his front steps with his head in his hands. The Williams family was arguing loudly about where they were going to find $500 by Thursday. Marcus realized that the situation had escalated beyond what he could handle alone. The fake officers were becoming more dangerous and more demanding. They were no longer satisfied with collecting small amounts of money from confused elderly people. They wanted bigger payoffs, and they were willing to use serious intimidation to get them. That afternoon, Marcus made several phone calls. First, he called the real police and filed a formal complaint about the fake HOA officers. He gave them all the information he had collected, including license plate numbers and detailed descriptions of the men. Then Marcus called his granddaughter Sarah at the newspaper. He told her that the story she had been interested in was getting bigger and more serious. He asked if she could come to his house on Tuesday evening to discuss it in person. Finally, Marcus made a phone call that he had not made in over 5 years. He called an old friend from his military days, a man named Jim who now worked in private security. Marcus explained the situation and asked if Jim knew anyone who might be able to help with a problem involving criminals who were threatening elderly people. "That sounds like something I'd be interested in helping with," Jim said. "I've got a couple of other guys who might want to get involved too. These fake authority scams are becoming a real problem everywhere." "I don't want anyone to get hurt," Marcus said. "But these people are terrorizing my neighbors and the police haven't been able to stop them yet." "Don't worry, Marcus. We know how to handle this kind of situation professionally. Let me make some calls and I'll get back to you tomorrow." That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table and thought about what was going to happen next. The fake officers had made a serious mistake by escalating their threats and bringing muscle to intimidate his neighbors. They thought they were dealing with helpless victims who would pay anything to avoid trouble. What they did not realize was that their escalation had changed the rules of the game. Marcus had been willing to handle this situation quietly and let the regular authorities deal with it. But now these criminals were threatening people he cared about with serious financial harm and possibly physical intimidation. Marcus had spent 30 years dealing with people who threatened innocent civilians. He knew how to escalate situations when necessary, and he knew how to do it in ways that stayed within the law while still being very effective. The fake officers thought they had found a neighborhood full of easy targets. They were about to learn that at least one of their targets was much more difficult than they had expected, and he was not planning to face them alone. Thursday was going to be very interesting when they came back to collect more money from the Williams family and check on Mr. Rodriguez's fake violations. Marcus would be ready for them, and this time he would not be watching quietly from his window. The quiet neighbor phase of this situation was officially over. It was time for the fake officers to meet the man that Marcus had been before he moved to Maple Street and started growing tomatoes. Marcus spent the week between visits preparing like he was planning a military operation. Every morning after his coffee, He sat at his computer and researched everything he could find about HOA scams and the people who ran them. He learned that this type of crime was becoming more common across the country. The criminals usually worked in teams of 2 or 3 people. They targeted neighborhoods with older residents who were more likely to be intimidated by authority figures. They used fake uniforms, fake badges, and official-looking paperwork to make their scam seem real. Most importantly, they always demanded cash payments that could not be traced. Marcus also spent time watching the neighborhood more carefully than usual. He noted which houses had security cameras and which ones did not. He figured out the best places to observe the street without being seen. He tested different positions in his yard and house to find spots where he could take clear photographs with his old camera. On Wednesday, Marcus drove to the library and used their computers to search for the license plate number he had written down from the white van. The search did not give him the information he wanted, but it confirmed what he already suspected. The van was probably rented or borrowed, not owned by any real HOA enforcement company. Thursday afternoon, Marcus called his granddaughter Sarah at the newspaper where she worked. "Hi, Grandpa," Sarah said when she heard his voice. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. I was wondering if you could help me with something. Have you ever written any stories about scams that target elderly people?" Sarah sounded interested immediately. As a reporter, she was always looking for stories that helped protect people from criminals. "I've written a few stories like that." "Why do you ask?" Marcus told her about the fake HOA officers and what they had been doing to his neighbors. He was careful not to mention his own plans to stop them. He just wanted Sarah to be aware of the situation in case she wanted to investigate it for the newspaper. "That sounds exactly like a scam that's been reported in other cities," Sarah said. "Grandpa, you need to call the police about this." "Some of the neighbors have called the police," Marcus said, which was true. "But the police say it's hard to catch these people because they move around to different neighborhoods and they only take cash." "Well, if you see them again, try to get their license plate number and take pictures if you can," Sarah said. "I might be able to write a story that warns other people about this scam." "I'll do that," Marcus said. He did not tell Sarah that he already had their license plate number and much more detailed plans than just taking pictures. Friday evening, Marcus got a visit from Mrs. Chen. She looked worried and was carrying a yellow piece of paper. "Mr. Thompson, they came back today while you were at the store," she said. "They left this new violation notice on my door." Marcus read the paper carefully. This one was different from the others. It said that Mrs. Chen had failed to replace her flowers with approved varieties, and now she owed an additional fine of $300. It also said that enforcement officers would return on Monday to inspect the property for compliance and collect all outstanding fees. The language on this paper was more threatening than the previous ones. It mentioned legal action and property seizure and court proceedings. Marcus could see why Mrs. Chen was frightened. "Did you see the men when they left this?" Marcus asked. "No, I was taking a nap. When I came outside to get my mail, this paper was stuck to my door." Marcus walked around Mrs. Chen's house and examined her flower garden. He also looked at the ground near her front door and driveway. He found tire tracks in the soft dirt next to her sidewalk. The tracks were wide and deep, like they came from a large van or truck. More importantly, Marcus found a cigarette butt near the tire tracks. It was a specific brand that was not very common. The fake officers had been careless and left evidence behind. Marcus walked Mrs. Chen back to her house and told her the same thing he had told her before. "Don't answer your door on Monday. Call me as soon as you see their van on the street." "What if they break down my door?" Mrs. Chen asked. "They won't do that," Marcus assured her. "They're criminals, but they're not violent criminals. They don't want to attract attention by doing things that would make the police come quickly." Saturday morning, Marcus took a drive around the surrounding neighborhoods. He wanted to see if he could find the white van or learn more about where the fake officers were operating. He found what he was looking for in a neighborhood about 5 miles away from Maple Street. The white van was parked in front of a house, and the 2 fake officers were walking up to the front door. Marcus parked his car where he could watch without being noticed. He observed their routine for over an hour. They visited 6 houses in that neighborhood, spending about 10 minutes at each house. At 3 of the houses, they collected money from the residents. At the other 3 houses, they left yellow papers stuck to the doors. Marcus noticed several important details. The fake officers were more relaxed in this neighborhood than they had been on Maple Street the week before. They laughed and joked with each other as they walked between houses. They were confident that their scam was working and that no one would challenge them. He also noticed that they kept their money in a metal cash box that the younger man carried. After they finished with each house, they put any cash they collected straight into the box. By Marcus's estimate, they collected at least $800 from that one neighborhood in just 1 hour. Most importantly, Marcus followed them when they left the neighborhood. They drove to a fast food restaurant and parked in the back of the parking lot. Both men got out of the van and walked to a blue sedan that was parked nearby. They transferred the cash box and some papers from the van to the sedan, then drove away in separate vehicles. This told Marcus several important things. The men were working with at least one other person who drove the sedan. They were moving their money and important papers to a different vehicle, probably to hide their profits and avoid being caught with evidence. And they were organized enough to plan meetup locations and coordinate multiple vehicles. Sunday evening, Marcus made a list of everything he had learned about the fake HOA officers. They operated on a regular schedule, visiting the same neighborhoods every week or two. They were part of a larger organization with multiple people and vehicles. They were collecting significant amounts of money and had a system for hiding their profits, and they were getting more aggressive and threatening with people who did not pay immediately. Marcus also made a list of everything he knew about their next planned visit to Maple Street. They would arrive on Monday morning, probably around 9:15. They would go to Mrs. Chen's house first because she had not replaced her flowers. They would demand payment of at least $500 for her various violations and fees. And they would probably be more aggressive than before because they thought the residents were too scared to resist. What the fake officers did not know was that Marcus had spent the entire week preparing for their visit. He had positioned cameras in his house to record everything that happened in the street. He had prepared questions to ask them that would expose their lack of real authority. He had contact information ready for the real police and the real HOA office. And he had backup plans in case things did not go as expected. Most importantly, Marcus had decided that this was the week to stop being the quiet neighbor who just watched things happen. The fake officers had been stealing money from his neighbors for too long. They were targeting people like Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez who could not afford to lose their grocery money to criminals. Marcus had spent 30 years protecting people from much more dangerous threats than fake HOA officers. These small-time criminals had picked the wrong neighborhood and the wrong week to escalate their threats against his neighbors. Monday morning could not come fast enough. Marcus was ready to remind some people that quiet old men were not always as helpless as they appeared to be. The fake officers were about to learn that some fights were much harder than they expected. The fake HOA officers returned to Maple Street exactly 1 week later. Marcus was expecting them. He had been watching from his kitchen window every morning, drinking his black coffee and waiting. When the white van appeared at the end of the street, Marcus was ready. This time he watched more carefully. He noted that the van arrived at 9:15 in the morning. The two men got out and spent about 15 minutes at each house they visited. They always went to the same houses where they had left yellow papers the week before. They were following up on their fake violations. Marcus put on his gardening gloves and went outside to work in his flower bed. From there he could see and hear everything that happened at Mrs. Chen's house, which was their first stop. The older man knocked on Mrs. Chen's door harder than necessary. When she opened it, he did not wait for her to speak. "Ma'am, we're here about your violation notice from last week. According to our records, you have not paid your fine or corrected the flower color problem." Mrs. Chen looked smaller and more worried than she had the week before. "I called the homeowner association office like my neighbor suggested. The lady there said you don't work for them." The man's voice got louder and more aggressive. "Ma'am, there seems to be some confusion. We work for the enforcement division, which is separate from the regular association office. The people in that office don't know about our operations because we handle the serious violations." He showed Mrs. Chen an official-looking badge and some papers with impressive seals on them.
"If you don't pay this fine today, we'll have to add additional fees for non-compliance.
The total will go up to $400 and we'll have to start the process for putting a lien on your property." Mrs. Chen looked frightened. She did not understand all the legal words the man was using, but she knew that a lien on her property sounded very bad. "I don't have $400, she said quietly. "Then you need to pay the original $200 today and fix your flowers by next week," the man said. He tapped his pen impatiently on his clipboard. We're trying to help you avoid bigger problems, ma'am. Marcus could see that Mrs. Chen was shaking. She went back inside her house and came out a few minutes later with her purse. She counted out $200 in cash and handed it to the man with trembling hands. "Smart choice, ma'am," the older man said as he put the money in his pocket. He gave Mrs. Chen a receipt that looked just as official as everything else he carried. "Remember, you have 1 week to replant with approved flower varieties." After the men left Mrs. Chen's house, they walked across the street to Mr. Rodriguez's house. Marcus moved to a different part of his garden so he could hear their conversation. Mr. Rodriguez had not paid his fine either, and he had not replaced his mailbox. The fake officers were not happy about this. "Sir, this is your final warning," the younger man said, trying to sound as tough as his partner. "Non-compliance with HOA regulations is a serious matter. We can escalate this to the county courthouse if necessary." "I talked to my neighbor," Mr. Rodriguez said. "He called the association office and they said they never heard of you." The older man stepped closer to Mr. Rodriguez in a way that was meant to be intimidating. "Sir, I'm going to explain this one more time. We are the enforcement division. We don't work in the same office as the regular association staff. They handle social events and newsletters. We handle violations and legal compliance." He pulled out a thick folder of papers. "This is your property file. We have documented multiple violations over the past several months. Your mailbox height, your grass length, your tree trimming, and your fence paint color. If you don't start cooperating with us, this file goes to the legal department." Mr. Rodriguez looked at the thick folder with worry. He did not know that it was probably full of blank papers or documents that had nothing to do with his property. All he saw was an official-looking man with a badge and a folder of papers about his house. "How much do I owe?" Mr. Rodriguez asked quietly. The original fine was $150. With late fees and non-compliance penalties, it's now $350. Plus, you still need to replace the mailbox with an approved model. Mr. Rodriguez's shoulders dropped. "I can't pay that much right now. Can I pay part of it?" The older man pretended to think about this. "I can accept $200 today if you promise to pay the rest next week and fix the mailbox. But this is the last time we can be flexible with you." Mr. Rodriguez went inside and came back with $200. Marcus watched the money disappear into the fake officer's pocket, just like Mrs. Chen's money had. The men continued down the street, visiting 4 more houses. At each house, they collected money from frightened neighbors who did not want to get in trouble with official-looking people. Marcus estimated that they collected about $1,000 in cash during their hour and a half on Maple Street. But Marcus noticed something else that was very important. The men were getting more confident and more aggressive with each house they visited. They were raising their voices more quickly and standing closer to the homeowners. They were learning that intimidation worked on his neighbors, and they were getting better at using it. After the white van left the neighborhood, Marcus walked over to check on Mrs. Chen. She was sitting on her front steps looking defeated. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked gently. Mrs. Chen looked up at him with sad eyes. "I gave them my grocery money for this week. Now I don't know what I'm going to eat until my Social Security check comes." Marcus felt anger building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm and kind. "Mrs. Chen, I want you to know that I don't think those men are real HOA officers. I think they're criminals who are stealing money from people in our neighborhood, but they had badges and official papers," Mrs. Chen said. "Those things can be faked," Marcus told her. "Anyone can buy fake badges online and print official-looking papers on their computer." Mrs. Chen looked confused. "But what can we do? They said they would put a lien on my house if I don't obey their rules." "They can't put a lien on your house because they don't work for any real organization," Marcus explained. "But I understand why you're scared. They're very good at making people believe they have power that they don't really have." Marcus helped Mrs. Chen to her feet. "I want you to do me a favor. Next time they come here, don't answer your door. Call me instead. Can you do that?" Mrs. Chen nodded, but she still looked worried. "What if they come back when you're not home?" "Then call the real police," Marcus said. "Tell them that people are pretending to be officials and demanding money from you." That evening, Marcus walked around the neighborhood and talked to all of his neighbors who had been visited by the fake officers. He learned that most of them had paid something, even if they could not afford the full amount. The criminals had collected over $1,500 from Maple Street alone. Marcus also learned that the fake officers had been visiting other neighborhoods too. Mrs. Patterson, who lived 3 streets over, said that her sister in the next town had been visited by similar men with the same story about HOA violations and fines. This was bigger than Marcus had first thought. The criminals were not just targeting his neighborhood. They were running the same scam in multiple areas, probably collecting thousands of dollars every week from frightened elderly people. Marcus went home and sat at his kitchen table with his notebook. He wrote down everything he had observed about the fake officers, their timing, their methods, their vehicle, and their patterns. He noted how much money they had collected and from which houses. Then Marcus began to plan. He had spent many years dealing with criminals who hurt innocent people. He knew how to gather information, build a case, and take action. The fake HOA officers thought they had found easy victims in a neighborhood full of quiet, elderly people. They had no idea that one of those quiet, elderly people had spent 30 years learning how to stop people exactly like them. Marcus had been retired from that kind of work for 8 years, but some skills never get rusty. It was time to dust off those skills and put them to good use again. The fake officers would be back next week to collect more money and intimidate more neighbors. Marcus would be ready for them. But this time, the quiet old man with the perfect garden would not be as quiet as they expected. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when Marcus first saw the white van, with the official-looking signs on its sides. He was watering his tomato plants when the vehicle drove slowly down Maple Street. The van had magnetic signs that read HOA Enforcement Division in bold blue letters. Below that, it said Protecting Property Values in smaller print. Marcus watched from behind his garden fence as the van stopped in front of Mrs. Chen's house. 2 men got out. They wore matching dark blue uniforms with shiny badges pinned to their chests. They carried clipboards and walked with the confident steps of people who believed they had important jobs to do. The older man was tall and heavy, with gray hair cut very short. His uniform was tight around his belly, and he wore sunglasses even though the morning was cloudy. The younger man was thin and nervous-looking. He kept checking his phone and adjusting his hat. Both men had name tags, but Marcus was too far away to read what they said. Marcus had seen many different types of authority figures in his life. He had worked with police officers and military personnel and government officials from many countries. Something about these 2 men made him pay closer attention. Real officers moved differently. They did not need to work so hard to look important. The men walked up to Mrs. Chen's front door and knocked loudly. When she answered, Marcus could hear the older man's voice even from his yard. The man spoke in a loud official tone that was meant to sound impressive. He was telling Mrs. Chen about new rules for the neighborhood association. Mrs. Chen looked confused and worried. She kept shaking her head and pointing at her flower garden. The men showed her papers from their clipboards. They took pictures of her house with a camera that looked very expensive. After about 10 minutes, they handed her a yellow piece of paper and walked back to their van. Marcus continued watering his plants, but he kept watching. The van drove to 3 more houses on the street. At each house, the same thing happened. The men knocked on doors, talked to the homeowners, took pictures, and left yellow papers behind. After they left, Marcus walked over to check his mailbox. Mrs. Chen was still standing in her front yard looking at the yellow paper in her hands. She looked upset and confused. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," Marcus said in his usual polite way. "Everything okay?" Mrs. Chen looked up at him with worried eyes. "Oh, Mr. Thompson, these men came to my house. They said they work for the homeowner association. They gave me this paper about my flowers." She handed the yellow paper to Marcus. It looked very official, with a fancy header and important-sounding language. The paper said that Mrs. Chen had violated neighborhood rules by planting flowers that were not approved colors. It said she had to pay a fine of $200 and change her flowers to acceptable varieties. Marcus read the paper carefully. Something was wrong with it, but he could not put his finger on exactly what. The language was too complicated and the fine was too high for such a small problem. Most importantly, Marcus had lived on Maple Street for 8 years, and he had never heard of any rules about flower colors. "Did you know we had these kinds of rules?" Mrs. Chen asked him. "I never heard about them before," Marcus said honestly. "Maybe you should call the real homeowner association office and ask them about this." Mrs. Chen nodded, but she still looked worried. "The men said if I don't pay by Friday, they will add more fees. They said they might put a lien on my house." Marcus handed the paper back to her. "I think you should definitely call the office first before you pay anything." After Mrs. Chen went back inside her house, Marcus walked slowly back to his yard. He was thinking about what he had just seen and read. In his years of military service, he had learned to spot things that did not fit the normal pattern. These men and their official papers felt wrong to him. That afternoon, Marcus took his usual walk around the neighborhood. He stopped to talk to Mr. Rodriguez, who was washing his car in his driveway. Mr. Rodriguez had also received a visit from the men in uniforms. "They said my mailbox is the wrong height," Mr. Rodriguez told Marcus. "They want me to pay $150 and buy a new mailbox. I've had the same mailbox for 12 years and nobody ever complained about it before." Marcus nodded and asked to see the yellow paper that Mr. Rodriguez had received. It looked just like Mrs. Chen's paper, with the same fancy header and complicated language. But this one was about mailbox regulations instead of flower colors. "Are you going to pay it?" Marcus asked. Mr. Rodriguez shrugged. "I don't want any trouble. My wife says we should just pay it and get it over with. But $150 is a lot of money for us right now." Marcus understood. Many of his neighbors were retired people living on fixed incomes. $100 or $200 was not a small amount for them. That made him even more suspicious about what was really happening. Over the next few days, Marcus heard similar stories from other neighbors. The men in uniforms had visited almost every house on the street. Everyone had received yellow papers with different violations and different fines. Some people were told their grass was too long. Others were told their house numbers were not the right size. One neighbor was cited for having too many cars in his driveway. Marcus started keeping track of all the different violations and fines. He wrote them down in a small notebook that he kept in his kitchen drawer. As he looked at the list, patterns began to emerge. The violations were all for small, harmless things that most people would not even notice. The fines were all between $100 and $300. And all of the papers had the same official look and complicated language. Most importantly, Marcus noticed that none of his neighbors had actually called the homeowner association office to verify these new rules. They were all too intimidated by the official-looking papers and the confident way the uniformed men had spoken to them. Marcus decided to do some research of his own. He found the real homeowner association contact information and made a phone call. The woman who answered the phone sounded genuinely confused when Marcus asked about the new enforcement officers. "We don't have any enforcement officers," she told him. "We're just a small neighborhood association. We send out newsletters and organize the annual block party. We don't have uniforms or official vehicles or anything like that." "What about fines for flower colors and mailbox heights?" Marcus asked. The woman laughed. "We don't have any rules about those things. People can plant whatever flowers they want and put up whatever mailboxes they like, as long as they follow the city regulations." After Marcus hung up the phone, he sat at his kitchen table and thought about what he had learned. The men in uniforms were not real HOA officers. They were running some kind of scam to trick his neighbors into paying fake fines. They had chosen his neighborhood because it was full of older people who were likely to be intimidated by official-looking papers and authoritative voices. Marcus had seen similar scams in other places during his years of service. Criminals often targeted elderly or vulnerable people with fake authority and complicated-sounding rules. They counted on their victims being too confused or scared to ask questions or verify information. But Marcus was not confused or scared. He was starting to get angry. These men were taking advantage of good people like Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez. They were using fear and intimidation to steal money from his neighbors, and they had chosen the wrong neighborhood to run their scam in. Marcus had not used his military training for many years, but he had not forgotten how to gather intelligence and plan operations. He decided it was time to find out exactly who these fake officers were and what they were really up to. Then he would figure out how to stop them. The men in the white van had no idea that they had just attracted the attention of someone who had spent 30 years dealing with much more dangerous criminals than them. They thought they had found easy targets in a quiet neighborhood. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Marcus Thompson woke up at 5:30 every morning. He had been doing this for 40 years. His body did not need an alarm clock anymore. The sun was still hiding behind the trees when he got out of bed and put on his old blue jeans and a plain white t-shirt. His house on Maple Street was small but very clean. Everything had its place. His bed was made with sharp corners. His shoes were lined up by the door. His coffee cup sat in the same spot on the kitchen counter every day. People who walked by his house often said it looked like a picture from a magazine. Marcus made his coffee black and strong. He sat at his kitchen table and looked out the window at his yard. Other people might see just grass and flowers, but Marcus saw much more. He noticed which way the wind was blowing. He saw where the morning shadows fell. He watched the birds and knew what their sounds meant. These were old habits that never went away. His neighbors thought he was just a quiet old man who kept to himself. They were not wrong, but they were not completely right either. Marcus was 78 years old, but his back was still straight and his eyes were still sharp. When he walked to get his mail, his steps were steady and sure. When he worked in his garden, his hands moved with the skill of someone who had done precise work for many years. The truth was that Marcus had not always been a quiet neighbor. For 30 years, he had served his country in ways that most people would never know about. He had traveled to places that were not on regular maps. He had done things that he could never talk about at dinner parties. But those days were long gone, and Marcus was happy to water his flowers and wave at people walking their dogs. Every Tuesday and Thursday, his granddaughter Sarah came to visit. She was 26 years old and worked as a reporter for the local newspaper. Sarah had dark hair like her grandmother, and curious eyes that always seemed to be asking questions. She loved her grandfather very much, but she often wondered about the parts of his life that he never talked about. "Grandpa, tell me about when you were in the army," Sarah would say sometimes. Marcus would smile and give the same answer he always gave. "I did some work overseas. Nothing too exciting. How about we make some cookies instead?" Sarah knew there was more to the story. She had seen the old photographs that her grandfather kept in a box in his closet. In the pictures, he was young and strong, wearing uniforms she did not recognize. He was always with other serious-looking men in places that looked hot and dusty. But whenever she asked about these photos, Marcus would just pat her hand and change the subject. The neighbors on Maple Street liked Marcus well enough. Mrs. Chen from next door often brought him vegetables from her garden. She said he was the most polite man she had ever met. Mr. Rodriguez from across the street sometimes asked Marcus for help fixing things around his house. Marcus always said yes and never asked for anything in return. "That Mr. Thompson is a good man," Mrs. Chen told her husband. "Very quiet, very respectful. I wish all the neighbors were like him." What Mrs. Chen and the others did not know was that Marcus noticed everything that happened on their street. He knew that Mrs. Chen's grandson visited every Sunday at 2 o'clock. He knew that Mr. Rodriguez left for work at 7:15 every morning and came home at 6:30 every evening. He knew which houses had dogs and which ones had security systems. He knew where every streetlight was and which ones worked properly. These were not things that a normal retired person would pay attention to. But Marcus was not exactly normal. His brain had been trained to collect information and store it away. Even though he was no longer a soldier, his mind still worked like one. Marcus spent his mornings working in his garden. He grew tomatoes and peppers and herbs that most people had never heard of. His plants were always healthy and green. His lawn was always cut to exactly the same height. Everything in his yard had a purpose and a place. In the afternoons, he would sit on his front porch and read books. He liked stories about history and biographies of interesting people. Sometimes children would walk by on their way home from school, and Marcus would wave at them. The children thought he was a nice old man who probably had candy in his pockets. After dinner, Marcus would take a walk around the neighborhood. He moved slowly and nodded hello to anyone he met. People thought he was just getting exercise, but Marcus was actually checking on things. He looked at which cars were parked where they should not be. He noticed if any windows or doors had been left open. He saw who was visiting which houses and when they left. This was not because Marcus was nosy or suspicious by nature. It was because he had spent most of his adult life in places where paying attention to small details could mean the difference between coming home safely and not coming home at all. Even though Maple Street was probably the safest place he had ever lived, old habits were hard to break. On weekends, Marcus would sometimes have coffee with other men his age at the diner downtown. They would talk about baseball and complain about the weather and discuss what was happening in the news. Most of these men were retired from normal jobs. They had been teachers or store managers or factory workers. They had lived regular lives with regular problems. Marcus never talked much during these conversations. He would listen and nod and sometimes make a joke that made everyone laugh. But he never shared stories about his own past. The other men had learned not to ask too many questions about what Marcus had done before he moved to Maple Street. What they did not understand was that Marcus had lived a life that was very different from theirs. While they were worried about meeting sales targets or dealing with difficult customers, Marcus had been thinking about much more serious problems. He had been responsible for the safety of other people in dangerous places. He had made decisions that affected the lives of many people he would never meet, but all of that was over now. Marcus was content to be the quiet neighbor who kept his grass cut short and always said good morning when people walked by. He had earned the right to live a simple life. He had done his duty and now he could rest. At least that is what he thought until the fake HOA officers showed up on Maple Street. Then Marcus would learn that sometimes the past has a way of becoming useful again, even when you think you are finished with it forever.